Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to explore some really dense philosophical territory and hopefully pull out the insights that stick with you.
Absolutely. And today we're tackling a massive question, one that kind of underpins everything else, really.
Right. Can we, just through human reason, thinking really hard, reach the ultimate truth?
No.
The kind of truth that defines your life?
Or does that kind of truth demand something else entirely? Something maybe more like divine intervention, a leap of faith?
It's that classic tension, isn't it? Athens versus Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Philosophy versus faith.
Exactly. And our sources today, they take us through this fascinating, really quite ironic thought experiment. It comes from the pseudonym Johannes Climacus in Philosophical Fragments.
So our mission, our deep dive today, is to chart this philosophical landscape. We want to see how the absolute peak of human reason, represented by Socrates, might unexpectedly point towards, well, the opposite, the paradox of religious faith.
Yeah, and Climacus sets it up starkly at first. He basically says, look, these two paths, philosophy and faith, they're completely separate, mutually exclusive. You can't walk on both.
But the interesting thing, and what we'll dig into, is how they might actually be connected deep down, like siblings, maybe? Linked by passion.
That's the core tension. From the faith perspective, philosophy seems arrogant,
Yeah.
a prideful and sinful delusion because it thinks it can do it all alone, ignoring human flaws.
And from reason's side, faith looks like, well, untruth.
Yeah.
Because it asks you to believe something absurd, something that flies in the face of logic.
The absolute paradox.
Right. So Climacus throws down the gauntlet. Can the Socratic way, pushed to its absolute limit, somehow become a bridge? It seems impossible.
It does. But let's see where the argument takes us. It's a real intellectual journey.
Okay, let's start with that first path, the Socratic way, the philosophical hypothesis. It all hinges on this idea of learning as recollection, doesn't it? Anamnesis.
Yes, anamnesis. And it's incredibly optimistic about human potential. The fundamental assumption is that truth isn't something you acquire from outside. It's already in you.
Latent, just waiting to be remembered.
Exactly. You're essentially seen as this immoral soul existing kind of outside of time, already holding eternal truth within. So if you're ignorant, it's not because you lack knowledge.
Because you've forgotten.
You've forgotten. You just need reminding. The truth is transcendent, sure, but it's also immanent. It's present right here inside your consciousness, just maybe buried.
But hang on, if it's already there, why all the struggle? Why did Socrates spend his whole life questioning people, seemingly searching for something?
Good question. The difficulty isn't the absence of truth, but the forgetting.
Yeah.
The noise, being an immortal soul trapped in a temporal, physical body. Well, that obscures things.
Like static on the radio?
Sort of. The search is about clearing that static, the opinions, the assumptions, the thing you think you know but don't. You clear that away so the eternal signal, the truth within, can come through clearly.
Okay, so that changes the role of the teacher dramatically then. If I already have the truth.
The teacher can't give it to you. Socrates, the master teacher here, is described as just an accidental vanishing point, an occasion.
Just an occasion, he has to vanish. Why?
Because if he stays, if he makes himself the source, he blocks your own path. The sources are clear. Socrates has companions, people he walks alongside, not students in the modern sense.
Like a midwife, helping you give birth to your own ideas.
Precisely. Maieudex. It's not about pouring knowledge into an empty cup. It's about helping you deliver the truth you're already carrying. If the teacher claims to be the repository of truth,
then you, the learner, miss the realization that the truth is eternal and comes from within you. You're cheated, in a way.
Exactly. And this path, this Socratic path of self-discovery, it's said to guarantee eternal happiness. Because if your soul is immortal and already contains eternal truth, then discovering that truth through self-knowledge connects you to that permanent, unchanging state of being. Your happiness isn't dependent on fleeting external things.
So things like history, specific events, the time you live in, they don't really matter for this ultimate goal.
Fundamentally, no. The focus is internal. To know yourself is to know the eternal, to achieve a kind of God knowledge in this framework. It's about grasping what's timeless, regardless of your temporal circumstances.
The actual moment you get it, the moment of insight.
Climacus says it's hidden in the eternal. It's decisive for you internally, but the specific date on the calendar, irrelevant in the grand scheme. It's the ideal of pure reason. Truth is accessible now if you have the discipline, the passion to look inwards.
Wow, okay, that's a pretty powerful optimistic view. But then Climacus presents the religious hypothesis,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like he just flips the table over.
Completely. It starts with a flat-out rejection of that Socratic optimism.
Yeah.
The core idea here is that you can't reach the truth through your own intellect, not just because you're ignorant.
But because you're in a state of untruth. What does that mean exactly? Is it just being wrong?
It's deeper than being wrong. Climacus uses the word sin, and sin here isn't just an intellectual mistake, it's a corruption of the will.
The will.
Mm.
Okay, why is that distinction so important? Corrupted will versus, say, corrupted intellect.
Because if it were just your intellect, your thinking, that was messed up, a good teacher could fix it, right? Give you better arguments, clearer facts, you could reform your understanding.
Makes sense.
But if your will is corrupted, if you've fundamentally chosen untruth, then you lack the very capacity to choose the good or even recognize the truth when it's presented. You're stuck.
Self-imprisoned, as the source puts it.
Yes. You lack the condition needed to understand. So simply reminding you of the truth, the Socratic way, it won't work. The radio receiver is broken, not just off station.
So the teacher in this hypothesis has a much bigger job. They can't just be an occasion.
Right. The divine teacher, the God himself, as Climacus says, has to bring not only the truth, but also the condition for understanding it. They have to fix the receiver.
Which means, what is that condition?
It's the ability to receive revelation. It's a liberated will, spiritual eyes to see, a capacity that humans stuck in sin don't have on their own. No human teacher can do this. It requires a radical transformation, not just reform.
A total rebirth, giving you a whole new capacity.
Exactly. That's why this teacher is called a savior and a deliverer. They're rescuing the learner from that self-imposed prison of sin.
And Climacus emphasizes that the teaching isn't just a list of rules or ideas.
No, that's crucial. The teaching is the teacher. It's the presence of the God in human form, and not just any form.
Indeed, in the lowly form of a servant. Why that specific form?
It's about bridging the infinite gap. The God, out of what's called resolving love, condescends, comes down to the learner's level, makes himself absolutely equal. The servant form is about humility, accessibility. It's the necessary way to deliver the truth and the condition without overwhelming the learner.
This whole idea of being reborn, needing a savior, a moment in time gaining this huge eternal weight. Climacus says humans couldn't have just invented this.
Precisely. The very concept of this kind of transformation, where a specific historical moment isn't irrelevant, like the Socratic moment, but becomes eternally decisive, that idea itself, Climacus argues, couldn't originate from unaided human reason.
It has to come from outside. It signals its divine origin.
Yes. It's a unique kind of teaching, utterly different from philosophy.
Okay, so this really sets up the conflict Climacus wants us trapped in, doesn't it? If you buy the religious hypothesis.
So that philosophy, with its confidence in reason and inner truth, looks like prideful and sinful delusion. It's missing the fundamental problem of sin.
And if you stick with the Socratic philosophical view,
then faith is simply untruth, because its core claim, the absolute paradox God becoming human, is a logical contradiction. It's absurd.
Absolute difference and absolute equality in one being. Reason says, nope.
Can't compute.
So we're left with these two islands, completely separate realities. How on earth can Climacus even attempt his project? Philosophical fragments, which tries to think from the Socratic viewpoint towards the religious one.
Yeah.
There's no bridge.
Well, that's the genius and the challenge. He seems to suggest the bridge isn't built from logic or theory, but maybe from looking closely at the practice of the best philosopher.
Socrates himself.
Exactly. What happens when Socrates, in his relentless honesty, pushes reason to its absolute breaking point? Does he, maybe without realizing it, show us the need for something beyond reason?
So the bridge, it's passion, the shared drive for truth.
That seems to be where Climacus is leading us. Let's dive into that.
All right, section 2. We're focusing now on Socrates, not just the theory attributed to him, but Socrates the man, the practitioner. Climacus calls him the anti-speculative hero.
Yes, and that's a key move. Climacus wants to rescue Socrates from later philosophers who might have turned his ideas into dry academic systems. He focuses on the tension between the Socratic hypothesis that knowledge is recollection and Socrates' actual life,
which was defined by his famous claim to know nothing.
Well, specifically his frank admission that he does not even know himself. If the hypothesis were strictly true and all knowledge is latent, how could the greatest philosopher constantly profess ignorance about the most fundamental thing, his own self?
Seems like a contradiction.
It is. And for Climacus, this isn't just a clever debating trick by Socrates. It's a profound, honest realization reached at the limit of his own inquiry. His ignorance isn't fake, it's real.
So what makes Socrates the gold standard then? If not the theory, what is it?
It's his integrity, the harmony between his words and his actions, logos, and ergon, as the Greeks called it.
His thinking and his existing were one thing.
Exactly. He refused to separate them. His life wasn't about building some grand abstract system in his head while living completely differently. His challenges to authority, his questioning in the marketplace, even his death, it was all living out his philosophical commitments.
And Climacus uses this to contrast him with who?
The sham philosophers, maybe the sophists, or perhaps the speculative philosophers of Kierkegaard's own time, like the Hegelians. People who could talk a good game, create these complex systems, but whose personal lives didn't reflect that supposed wisdom at all. Socrates lived his philosophy.
But is that even possible? To live in perfect harmony with your ideas? Doesn't that just set you up for failure and despair? It sounds almost inhuman.
That's a fair point, and it touches on the pathos we'll discuss later. But for Socrates, the value was in the striving. The attempt itself was the philosophical act. He knew perfection was elusive, but the commitment was everything.
And his acknowledged ignorance played a role here too.
Crucially, it kept him honest. It stopped him from pretending he had all the answers, from inventing things just to complete a system. His ignorance was, in a way, what grounded his striving.
There's also that fascinating bit about him refusing to be glorified, refusing followers who just wanted to idolize him.
Yes. He feared that if people worshipped him, they'd think the truth was in him, personally, and that would, as Climacus puts it, cheat the learner of their own eternal prospects. They'd miss the point that truth is internal and universal.
So he had to sort of deflect the attention.
He did. And Climacus draws this amazing parallel to the divine teacher, the God. The God also refuses to reveal himself in blinding glory because that would just kill the learner spiritually. It wouldn't allow for a free, subjective embrace of truth.
So both Socrates and the God practice a kind of divine irony, a holding back.
A necessary concealment, yes. To protect the learner's freedom and ensure the appropriation of truth is personal, not forced.
Okay, this brings us squarely to passion. Climacus argues that Socrates' driving force, his philosophia or love of wisdom, is actually Eros.
Right, and we need to be careful here. This isn't romantic love. Eros in Plato, where Climacus gets this, is this powerful daimonic force. It's in between the human and the divine.
Daimonic, like a spirit or a guiding force.
Something like that. Plato describes Eros as the child of poverty and resource, meaning it's this state of constantly longing for what it lacks, beauty, goodness, truth, but also having the ingenuity and drive to pursue it. It's a restless, upward striving passion.
And for Socrates, this Eros is what makes learning possible.
It's the precondition. It's what fuels the soul's journey. It draws the soul towards the forms, the eternal realities like the beautiful and the good. It awakens that memory, that recollection we talked about. Eros makes the soul prophetic, aware of its own higher potential.
But wasn't Socrates' quest just his own idea? Didn't he just wake up one day and decide to question everyone?
According to the dialogues, no. And this is a critical point for Climacus. Socrates' mission was aroused and validated by the oracle of Apollo at Delphi.
The famous story where the oracle said no one was wiser than Socrates.
Exactly. And Socrates, puzzled by this, set out to test the oracle statement. But notice what happens before the questioning begins. He trusts the god. He operates on the assumption that Apollo is not saying something false. His entire philosophical life's work is kicked off by an act of trust in a divine authority before his reason goes to work.
Wow. So his reason serves a preceding faith, in a way.
It's something very much akin to faith, as the source puts it. His decision to philosophize isn't purely spontaneous, rational choice. It's a response to and validation of a divine word. Athens meets Jerusalem right there at the origin.
Okay, so this intense passion, this Eros, rooted partly in trust. Where does it ultimately lead reason?
To its own limit. Climacus makes this incredibly provocative claim. The ultimate passion of thought is to will its own downfall.
To want to destroy itself. Why?
Not destroy itself exactly, but to push so hard for truth that it willingly encounters something that thought itself cannot think. It wants to find the boundary.
It seeks the unknown.
It seeks the collision with the unthinkable. That collision, that point where reason throws its hands up and says, I can't grasp it, but I know it's there, that's the ultimate paradox of thought.
And this unknown, this unthinkable thing that reason bumps up against.
Climacus identifies it simply as the god.
Ah, So for Socrates, the God isn't necessarily a defined religious figure, but
It's the name for the mystery, the necessary unknown, the piece missing from the puzzle of the self, without which the self remains incomplete. His Eros-driven quest inevitably leads him to see the limits of his own reason. He can guess, he can sense, but he can't know this unknown through reason alone.
which loops back to his ignorance. Whatever I do not know, I do not even suppose I know. That wasn't just humility, it was a philosophical necessity.
Climacus calls it his saving grace. Because he acknowledged his limits, because he was honest about his ignorance, he avoided the temptation to just make something up.
To invent God, or to create a rational system that pretends to explain everything.
Exactly. He resisted that capricious arbitrariness. His integrity, his humility, born from passionate searching, kept him honest at the boundary. And in doing so, it left him open to the possibility of the absolute paradox, even if he, as a philosopher, could only stand at the threshold and acknowledge the unknown.
Okay, section 3. We've reached the threshold of Socrates. Now, Climacus pushes us over it into the realm of the religious hypothesis and the absolute paradox itself.
Right. If Socratic passion leads reason to its limit, faith begins precisely at that limit. And the limit is defined by this absolute paradox.
Which is, remind us again.
It's the unity of total opposites. Absolute difference. That's God. Utterly transcendent, completely other, especially given human sin, which creates this infinite gap.
Okay, God as totally alien. And the other side?
Absolute equality. That's God choosing to become fully human, entering time specifically in the lowly form of a servant. God becomes indistinguishable from any other human being.
So the infinitely different becomes infinitely equal at the same time, in the same being.
Yes. And this is where reason just stops. It's discharged, as Climacus says. Reason works with categories, distinctions, either infinite or finite, God or human. The paradox insists on both and.
Can you give us that analogy again? Why is this so impossible for reason?
It's like, imagine trying to logically prove that 2 + 2 = 5, or demonstrating geometrically that a perfect square is simultaneously a perfect circle. Reason functions by respecting fundamental distinctions.
Infinite means not finite. Different means not equal.
Correct. The paradox isn't just a difficult puzzle reason hasn't solved yet. It's presented as a direct contradiction to reason's basic operating principles, yet proclaimed as the truth.
So if reason is out of the picture, what takes over?
Faith. Faith is described as the happy passion. It's the subjective response required to embrace this objective absurdity.
A happy passion. Why happy? Isn't embracing absurdity terrifying?
Well, it's terrifying for reason, maybe, but for the person trapped in sin, the paradox is the only news of salvation. The absurdity is the very mechanism of rescue. So the passion that embraces it, despite the offense to reason, is ultimately joyful. It's the passion of receiving a gift you could never earn or understand.
And crucially, this faith is not knowledge.
Absolutely not. Climacus is very clear. Knowledge, for him, operates in 2 realms. The eternal, like math, which has no history, or the purely historical, like knowing Caesar crossed the Rubicon, which has no eternal necessity.
But faith deals with the paradox.
Which is the impossible union of the eternal and the historical. God, in time, historical, as a specific person. Therefore, you can't know it like you know math, nor can you prove it like you prove a historical event.
This really changes how you'd approach things like historical evidence for, say, the life of Jesus.
Massively. Climacus argues that historical research, digging up documents, analyzing texts, archaeology, can neither help nor hinder faith. Why? Because faith isn't about the historical container. It's about the eternal content within the historical container.
Trying to prove it historically separates the 2 things that faith holds together.
Exactly. Historical inquiry can only establish probabilities about contingent past events. It can't grasp the eternal reality paradoxically present in that event. Faith leaps directly to the eternal significance, regardless of the historical proofs.
So belief isn't intellectual agreement based on evidence, Climacus calls it.
An act of freedom, an expression of will. It's a choice.
A choice to stop doubting.
Yes. Doubt isn't overcome because you suddenly know. Doubt is consciously annulled by an act of will. You choose to commit, to accept the risk involved in believing the absurd.
And the skeptic.
The skeptic also makes a choice they choose by an act of will to sustain the doubt, to remain suspended, refusing the risk. Faith is the leap. Skepticism is the refusal to leap. Both are choices.
Okay, let's shift back to Socrates for a moment, because Climacus brings him back as the model subjective existing thinker.
Yes, because Socrates refused to let his thinking become detached from his life. This leads to the idea of subjective truth.
Which isn't just truth is whatever you think it is.
No, not relativistic. It's about how truth is held. Climacus says, to understand, truly to understand is to be. Truth isn't some static object like a finished book or a theorem you can write down and then ignore.
So the truth is only in the becoming, in the process of appropriation. What does that mean, appropriation?
It means making it your own, living it, constantly striving to relate the universal, eternal truth, whatever that might be for you, to your own specific, messy, time-bound life. It's an ongoing process, not a finished product.
That sounds exhausting, this constant striving.
It is, and Climacus acknowledges this. He says the striving is both pathos-filled and comic.
Pathos-filled because it's directed towards the infinite, the eternal. It has weight.
Exactly. It's driven by immense passion, but it's also comic because, well, think about it. You, a finite, flawed human being, trying to perfectly embody or grasp the infinite.
It's impossible. You're going to fail.
There's an inherent self-contradiction in the attempt, like trying to pour the entire ocean into a teacup. The gap between the infinite aspiration and the finite reality has a kind of tragicomic quality to it.
So Socratic striving, the inward passion, dealing with objective uncertainty about knowledge, is like an analogy for Christian faith.
Yes, structurally similar. Christian faith is also inward passion, infinite striving, but it's dealing with objective absurdity, the paradox. The shape is the same. Subjective commitment in the face of objective difficulty.
But Climacus insists the difference is huge.
Infinite, he says, because for Socrates, theoretically, the truth might still be latent within anamnesis. The back door of recollection isn't definitively locked.
But for the Christian, because of sin.
That back door is forever closed. You cannot find the saving truth within yourself. It must come as a gift, as revelation. Therefore, embracing the paradox requires infinitely greater resilience, a deeper passion, because you have absolutely no recourse to your own resources. Self-help is off the table.
Wow, okay. This also leads Climacus into a direct confrontation with certain ideas about history, right?
Yeah.
Particularly the Hegelian idea of historical necessity.
Absolutely. This is a major target. Climacus fiercely attacks the notion that history unfolds according to some inevitable, necessary logic.
Why is it so important for him to refute?
Because if history is necessary, if everything that happened had to happen exactly that way, then human freedom is an illusion.
Right. No real choices, no moral responsibility.
And the very idea of coming into existence becomes meaningless. Things that are necessary don't come into existence, they just are, eternally. So anything that genuinely has come into existence must be contingent, not necessary. It happened freely.
All creation, all historical events stem from freedom.
Ultimately, yes. Pointing back, for Climacus, to an absolutely freely acting cause God, this defense of contingency is vital for preserving freedom, change, repentance.
But when we look back at history, it often feels inevitable, doesn't it? Like dominoes falling.
Climacus anticipates that. He calls it a mental illusion, caused by distance in time.
Like his analogy of seeing a square from far away.
Exactly. From a great distance, a square might look like a circle, a sensory illusion. Similarly, great distance in time creates a mental illusion of necessity. When you're living through events, they feel open, contingent, full of choices. Look back centuries later, and it seems like it had to go that way.
And this view that history is necessary is dangerous.
Very dangerous for Climacus. It eliminates genuine freedom and the significance of individual choice. It promotes a kind of passive observation rather than active engagement.
How does this impact the idea of being a follower at second hand, someone born long after the key events of faith?
It completely demolishes that idea. If the core event, the paradox, God entering history, is both historical and eternal, then it confronts every generation in essentially the same way.
Time doesn't make it easier or harder.
No. There's no follower at second hand. The leap of faith, the decision to embrace the paradox in your own subjective life, is just as difficult, just as necessary, just as much of a risk for someone today as it was for someone in the first century. Time doesn't dilute the challenge.
So faith isn't like arriving at a safe harbor. It's more like...
It's like being on a leaky ship. That's Climacus's image. Sitting calmly on deck in good weather. That's not faith.
What is then?
When the ship springs a leak, then enthusiastically to keep the ship afloat by pumping and not to seek the harbor, that is the metaphor for having faith.
Constantly working against the leak being.
The understanding. Reason, which keeps pointing out the absurdity, the hopelessness, the contradiction. Reason despairs, like a panicked passenger. But faith keeps bailing the water, vigorously in the depths, joyful and victorious, actively choosing commitment over despair. It's a lifelong struggle.
Okay, so if we reject absolute necessity, whether it's historical determinism or maybe even scientific determinism, if we embrace this radical freedom and uncertainty that Climacus insists on, how does that change how we view our own struggles, our own decisions today?
Fundamentally, I think, it means you're not just a product of forces beyond your control. Your choices matter deeply. They are contingent, free, and therefore carry immense weight. You can't just rely on a system, a history, a science to tell you the necessary outcome.
The responsibility comes back to you. The individual making the choice.
Entirely. It puts the burden of subjective commitment squarely on your shoulders. #outro.
So let's try to bring this all together. After this really intense deep dive, what's the final picture Climacus paints of the relationship between Athens and Jerusalem, reason and faith?
I think the core conclusion is pretty stunning. It's that Socratic philosophy, when lived with absolute passion and integrity, culminating in that honest admission of ignorance, that becomes the highest point human reason can reach on its own.
And that very peak, that limit, is what paradoxically serves as the only possible bridge towards faith.
Yes. Socrates becomes the touchstone for the adequacy of thought. He shows us reason's limit. It can get us to the door of the unthinkable paradox, but it can't open it or enter. Living like Socrates, valuing existence over abstraction, striving for truth with integrity, admitting your limits, that process itself opens the soul to the possibility of the divine other.
His ignorance saves him from the pride of thinking reason is enough.
It's his philosophical salvation. It prevents him from just inventing answers reason can't provide.
And it's about living your life based on an if. Socrates lived as if the soul were immortal, staking his existence on that uncertainty with infinite passion.
That practical demonstration, that existential commitment, that's the subjective truth. Not a theory, but a life lived in passionate striving. And that makes him the analog for faith.
Climacus seems to suggest everyone needs that Socratic integrity just to even see the need for something more.
Without that passionate drive for truth, that Eros, you wouldn't even push reason hard enough to discover its limits. You just stay comfortable within its boundaries.
But then there's that final twist, that profound irony you mentioned earlier, drawn from the sources.
Yeah, it's quite humbling. Climacus and Kierkegaard behind him seems acutely aware that he himself cannot replicate Socrates' achievement. That Socratic life, holding thought and existence together so perfectly, it's presented as almost superhuman.
Beyond our reach, perhaps.
Likely beyond most of our reach. Socrates' integrity is shown as unique, heroic. So the irony is, the very philosophical bridge Climacus points to, living like Socrates, might be an ideal that's almost impossibly high for the rest of us.
So he uses Socrates to humble us, especially maybe academic thinkers, to show that real truth-seeking demands more than just clever arguments. It demands your whole life.
Precisely. It demands a passionate integrity that few possess.
Which leaves us realizing that the highest truth isn't found in the objective answer, the system, the final result.
But only in the becoming, in that infinite subjective striving, in the process of appropriation, in constantly bailing water on that leaky ship.
Choosing commitment over despair, moment by moment.
So the ultimate question Climacus leaves us with, leaves you, the listener, with, isn't about which grand theory is correct. It's much more personal.
It's what uncertain, risky, maybe even absurd if are you staking your entire existence on? What are you passionately appropriating into your own life?
That's a challenge for every subjective existing thinker facing the limits of reason.
Definitely food for thought, and a challenging place to end our deep dive for today.